My cousin Ryland was the child my family praised in every room I walked into, and I was the punchline they laughed about once they thought I couldn't hear. That was how it had always been. I learned early how to smile while my chest felt tight, how to pretend I didn't notice when their voices softened for him and sharpened for me. At family dinners, Ryland's name floated through the house like something sacred. His grades, his manners, his future plans. Everything about him was worth admiring. When I spoke, the room usually went quiet in an uncomfortable way. Then someone would crack a joke to move things along. They called it teasing. They said I was too serious if I looked hurt. So I laughed along, even when I didn't understand what was funny about being compared to him over and over. Growing up, I was measured against Ryland in ways I could never win. If he did well, it was because he was gifted. If I did well, it was because I finally tried. If he failed, excuses were made. If I struggled, it became a story they retold later, usually with laughter. No one ever said they didn't love me. They just showed it differently. Or that's what I was told. The jokes were small at first. Comments about how Ryland was the star of the family. How I was the entertaining one. Over time, those words settled into me. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped expecting defense. I learned that staying quiet made things easier for everyone else. When I left home, I thought distance would fix it. I built a life where no one knew my role, where my name wasn't followed by comparisons. I convinced myself that chapter was closed. Family was something I could keep at arm's length, something that couldn't reach me anymore. Then the reunion invitation arrived in the mail. Thick paper, familiar handwriting, a simple request, wrapped in cheerful words about togetherness and memories. The moment I read it, my stomach tightened the way it used to when I was a kid sitting at their table. I told myself I didn't have to go. I could throw it away and keep my peace. But another part of me wondered what would happen if I showed up as I was now, not as the family joke they remembered. That thought scared me more than staying away. In the end, I folded the invitation and set it on my desk. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel ready. I just knew I was tired of running from a story that never stopped following me. So, quietly, I decided I would attend. When I think back to my childhood, the memories always begin in the same small Midwest town where everyone knew our last name. Our family gatherings were loud and crowded, filled with long tables, heavy food, and conversations that always seemed to circle back to Ryland. He was the one people noticed first. He walked into a room with confidence, and adults leaned in as if they were being given a gift just by listening to him speak. Ryland did well in school, and every report card felt like a celebration. His sports trophies were displayed proudly, polished and placed where everyone could see them. Even when he barely tried, people called him impressive. They said he had something special. His smile was charming, his mistakes brushed aside as growing pains. No one ever worried about his future. They talked about it like it was already guaranteed. I stood nearby, usually holding a plate or sitting quietly on the couch. I wasn't loud or bold, and that made people uncomfortable. When I didn't jump into conversations, someone would point it out. They said I was too quiet, asked why I never spoke up. If I reacted to a comment or looked upset, they called me sensitive. It became a label that followed me everywhere. I learned that staying still and saying less brought less attention, even if it didn't stop the comments completely. Aunt Maribel never hid her pride in Ryland. She praised him openly, touching his shoulder when she spoke about him, smiling in a way she never did with me. When he talked, she listened closely. When I spoke, she interrupted or corrected me. It wasn't cruel in an obvious way, but it was constant. I felt it every time her eyes passed over me to focus on him instead. My parents noticed, but they didn't challenge it. They said it was easier not to argue, that family harmony mattered more. When I mentioned feeling overlooked, they told me not to take things so seriously. They reminded me that Maribel meant well, that Ryland didn't mean to shine brighter. I accepted those explanations because I didn't know what else to do. Every holiday and birthday carried the same pattern. Compliments for Ryland. Gentle jokes at my expense. Laughter that made my face warm and my throat tight. No one ever raised their voice, but the message was clear. By the time I was old enough to understand it, the damage was already done. I didn't argue or fight back. I absorbed it instead. The resentment settled quietly, growing beneath the surface, shaping how I saw myself and where I believed I belonged. By the time I reached my teenage years, my role in the family felt fixed. I was no longer just the quiet one. I had become the joke. At gatherings, someone would bring up an old mistake of mine, and the story would grow bigger each time it was told. People laughed easily, as if those moments were meant to entertain them. I smiled along because correcting them only made things worse. Whenever I tried something new, the attention turned sharp. If I failed, even slightly, it was remembered and repeated. If I succeeded, it passed unnoticed. Good grades were called luck. Effort was dismissed as overthinking. I learned that nothing I did would ever be enough to change the way they saw me. Ryland's teenage years looked very different. Scholarships came with applause. Achievements were announced proudly, even to people who barely knew us. Every win was proof that he was destined for something bigger. The family spoke about his future with certainty, like it was already written. He accepted the praise easily, never questioning why it came so freely. I had dreams too, but they were treated like harmless fantasies. When I spoke about them, someone would smile and tell me to be realistic. Others laughed and said I should aim lower. Their words were light, but they landed hard. Slowly, I stopped sharing what I wanted. It felt safer to keep those thoughts to myself than to watch them be taken apart in front of everyone. The moment that changed everything came during a family discussion about a small project. I shared an idea, nervous but hopeful. Ryland listened quietly. Later, when the idea was praised, he repeated it as if it were his own. The room filled with approval. No one questioned where it came from. When I tried to speak, I was talked over. Someone joked that I should be proud to be inspired by him. That was the first time I understood what betrayal felt like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calm, casual, and completely accepted by everyone else. Ryland didn't look at me. He didn't apologize. He simply took what wasn't his and let the family reward him for it. I realized then that speaking up had a cost I couldn't afford. Defending myself only made me look bitter. Silence, on the other hand, kept the peace. So I chose it. I nodded, laughed when expected, and swallowed my anger. Survival meant staying quiet, even as my voice slowly disappeared. The breaking point came at a family celebration that was supposed to be joyful. Relatives filled the house, plates clattered, and voices overlapped in familiar ways. I tried to stay in the background, telling myself it would be easier if I didn't draw attention. For a while it worked. Then Ryland stood up to speak. He smiled like he always did, relaxed and confident. At first, his words were harmless. People listened, already amused. Then he turned his attention to me. He made a joke about something I had struggled with, twisting it just enough to make it sound ridiculous. He said it lightly, as if it were nothing, as if I should laugh too. The room erupted. Laughter bounced off the walls, loud and unrestrained. I felt my face burn as I looked around, waiting for someone to stop it. No one did. Not a single voice pushed back. Some people wiped tears from their eyes from laughing so hard. Others nodded, like the joke confirmed something they already believed about me. I forced a smile, but inside something broke. I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection and barely recognizing the person looking back. My hands were shaking. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway. It wasn't just the joke. It was everything that led up to it. Later that night, I found my parents in a quiet room and told them how humiliated I felt. I expected, just once, for them to stand up for me. Instead, they sighed. They said Ryland didn't mean any harm. They told me I was taking it too personally. They reminded me that causing conflict would only make things harder for everyone. That was the moment I understood the truth. The betrayal wasn't only Ryland's. It belonged to all of them. Every laugh, every excuse, every time they chose comfort over fairness. I had been asking for protection from people who benefited from my silence. When I got home that night, I sat on my bed and let myself fall apart. The anger, the sadness, the years of holding everything in came rushing out. When it finally slowed, something else took its place. Clarity. I couldn't change them, but I could remove myself. Staying meant accepting the role they gave me. Leaving meant choosing something unknown, but my own. That night, I decided I would leave town. I would stop chasing their approval and cut the ties that had been hurting me for so long. Leaving town felt unreal. There was no farewell dinner, no proud speeches, no promises to visit. I packed my belongings quietly and drove away with a mix of fear and relief sitting heavy in my chest. College was supposed to be a new beginning, but I arrived with no safety net. I paid for what I could on my own and learned quickly how expensive independence could be. Money was always tight. I worked long hours around my classes, often exhausted, sometimes skipping meals to save what little I had. When things felt overwhelming, There was no one I could call for comfort. I watched other students receive care packages and weekend visits while I learned how to manage on my own. Nights were the hardest. The silence made everything feel heavier. Back home, life continued without me. I heard bits and pieces through occasional conversations. Ryland was still doing well. His achievements were still celebrated. Every update came with excitement, as if the family needed constant reminders of his success. No one asked how I was doing. No one wondered if I needed help. It was as if my absence made things easier. I kept going anyway. I focused on small victories, even when no one noticed them. Passing a difficult class, paying rent on time, getting through a tough week without giving up. There were no congratulations waiting for me, no proud messages. Just distance. At first, that hurt more than I expected. I had left to protect myself, but the loneliness still found me. Over time, something shifted. Without constant judgment, I started to breathe easier. I learned who I was without their voices in my head. I made choices without worrying how they would be compared to someone else. The strength I was building didn't come from praise. It came from survival. Holidays were the final line I stopped crossing. The first year I made an excuse. The next year I didn't respond at all. Each time I stayed away, the guilt grew smaller. The quiet felt less like punishment and more like peace. I was alone in many ways, but I wasn't shrinking anymore. The isolation forced me to rely on myself, and slowly, that reliance turned into confidence. No one clapped for me as I moved forward, but I learned how to stand on my own without waiting for approval that was never coming. Years passed quietly. My life didn't change all at once, but piece by piece, it became something stable. I kept working, kept learning, kept showing up even when no one was watching. I didn't have connections or favors to fall back on. Everything I earned came from persistence. When one path closed, I looked for another. When I failed, I adjusted and tried again. Eventually, I found a career that fit me. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest work, and I was good at it. Each step forward felt earned. I learned how to trust my own judgment and take responsibility for my choices. The pride I felt came quietly, without anyone else confirming it. That was new for me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped measuring myself by my family's standards. Their voices grew faint in my mind. I learned my value didn't depend on being noticed or praised. It came from consistency, from keeping promises to myself, from not giving up when things were difficult. I became someone I respected, even if no one else knew it. My family remained distant. They didn't know where I worked or how I lived. I doubt they noticed the change in my absence. From what little I heard, Ryland was still doing well. His name still carried weight. He was still the one spoken about with pride, the one whose life seemed protected and admired. Nothing about that story appeared to have changed. I didn't feel jealous anymore. Mostly, I felt detached. The past felt like something that belonged to another version of me, someone younger and more fragile. I avoided thinking about those years because reopening them felt unnecessary. I had built something solid, and looking back threatened that balance. Then the reunion letter arrived. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Just seeing the family name written so neatly brought back memories I thought I had buried. My first instinct was to ignore it. I had worked hard to move forward, and I didn't owe anyone my presence. But another part of me hesitated. Not because I wanted approval, but because I wondered if there was something unfinished. I didn't know if I wanted closure, or if I was just curious about who they thought I still was. The idea of returning made my chest feel tight, but it also stirred a quiet question I couldn't ignore. Had I truly let go, or had I just learned how to live around the hurt? I didn't have an answer yet. I only knew that the letter had reopened a door I thought was closed, and deciding whether to walk through it became harder with every passing day. The reunion was described as a chance to bring everyone back together. The words on the invitation spoke about healing, forgiveness, and shared memories. I read those lines more than once, trying to understand what they meant. Part of me felt suspicious. Another part felt tired of carrying questions without answers. For days, I went back and forth. Fear told me to stay away. Anger reminded me of everything that had been brushed aside. Curiosity whispered that maybe facing the past would loosen its grip on me. None of those feelings were loud on their own, but together they made it hard to sleep. I wasn't sure which one would win. I thought about what I wanted if I went. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't interested in making a scene or demanding apologies. I didn't need them to admit anything. What I wanted was simpler and harder at the same time. I wanted to stand in the same room without shrinking. I wanted to see if I could tell the truth, even if no one welcomed it. I prepared quietly, not with speeches or plans, but with boundaries. I reminded myself that I could leave at any moment. I didn't owe anyone explanations. I practiced staying calm, even when uncomfortable. I told myself that their reactions were not my responsibility. That was my armor. When the day came, my hands trembled as I drove there. Each mile closer brought back old feelings I thought I had outgrown. I parked and sat in the car longer than necessary, breathing slowly before stepping out. Walking inside felt like stepping into another time. The house looked familiar, almost unchanged. The sounds, the smells, the way people greeted each other. It all felt the same. For a moment, it was easy to believe that nothing had shifted, that I would slide back into the role they remembered. Faces turned when I entered. Some looked surprised. Others smiled politely. Conversations paused and then continued. No one rushed forward. No one pulled me into an embrace. I was present, but not central, just like before. As I moved through the room, I watched the dynamics carefully. Ryland still stood comfortably in the center of attention. Laughter still followed him. Compliments still came easily. The patterns were intact, at least on the surface. I took a seat and stayed quiet, letting the tension settle. I hadn't come to prove anything. I had come to exist in the same space without disappearing. Whether that was possible, I didn't know yet. But I stayed, waiting to see what would unfold. As the reunion continued, small cracks began to show. Ryland still held the room's attention, but something felt off. His stories didn't land the way they used to. Details didn't line up. He spoke confidently, but there was a strain underneath his voice, like he was trying too hard to keep the image intact. At one point, someone asked him a simple question about his work. He hesitated, then gave an answer that felt rehearsed. Another relative followed up, and he brushed it off with a joke. The laughter came slower this time. A few people exchanged looks, subtle but noticeable. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to shift the mood. I stayed quiet, listening. I didn't feel the need to react. I had learned how to observe without absorbing everything. When old jokes were thrown in my direction, they didn't hit the same. Someone made a comment that would have once embarrassed me. This time, it hung in the air. No one laughed. I didn't rush to smile or deflect. I simply met their eyes and stayed calm. That silence did something. It made people uncomfortable in a different way. A few relatives looked at me more closely, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. Questions followed, casual at first. Where had I been living? What kind of work did I do? How long had I been there? I answered simply. No exaggeration. No apology. Just the truth. Each response felt steady, grounded. I didn't compare myself to anyone. I didn't explain my absence. I didn't bring up the past unless asked. The more I spoke, the more the room shifted. My calm stood in contrast to Ryland's restless energy. He interrupted once or twice, but it felt forced. Someone gently redirected the conversation back to me. That had never happened before. People began to notice the difference. Not just between us, but in themselves. The way they had assumed things. The way they had filled in gaps without asking. No one said it out loud, but the change was there. I hadn't planned for this. I wasn't trying to expose anything. The truth didn't need help. It surfaced naturally, filling the space where old stories used to sit. As the evening went on, Ryland's confidence faded. The room no longer revolved around him alone. For the first time, the balance shifted. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. And in that steadiness, the power I had never been given quietly found its way back to me. The moment came without planning. The room had grown quiet in a way that felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for something to be said. Someone asked a question about the past, and all eyes turned toward me. For the first time, I didn't look away. I spoke slowly and kept my voice steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't accuse or insult anyone. I talked about what had happened over the years in simple terms. I explained how jokes had replaced support, how comparisons had shaped every gathering, how silence had been mistaken for agreement. I didn't use emotional words. I didn't need to. The facts carried enough weight on their own. As I spoke, I could see expressions change. Some people looked confused at first. Others looked uncomfortable. A few stared at the floor. I continued, describing moments that had been brushed aside, times when my ideas were taken and my feelings dismissed. I made it clear that these weren't misunderstandings. They were patterns. Ryland tried to interrupt. He laughed lightly and said I was remembering things wrong. This time, no one laughed with him. When I calmly corrected him, pointing out details he couldn't deny, his tone shifted. The charm slipped. Frustration crept in. His words became sharp, defensive. In that shift, something was revealed. People saw it then. Not all at once, but enough. They noticed how quickly he turned dismissive, how easily he blamed others. The image they had protected for years began to fall apart. No one rushed to save it. The room stayed silent as my words settled. I finished without asking for anything. I didn't demand understanding or forgiveness. I simply stopped talking. Apologies followed, awkward and heavy. Some were quiet. Some were rushed. A few felt sincere, but they came too late to change what had already been done. I listened without reacting. I realized I wasn't waiting for these words anymore. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Revenge didn't have to be loud or cruel. It didn't require punishment. It was this: speaking the truth without anger. Letting people see what they chose to ignore. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had just stopped protecting a lie that never served me. I left the reunion earlier than anyone expected. I didn't linger for conversations or excuses. I didn't wait for praise or recognition. I walked out quietly, my steps measured and calm. For the first time, leaving wasn't about fear or hiding. It was about choice. I was in control of my own movement, my own presence, my own story. Behind me, I could feel the shift. The room was silent in a new way. My family sat in unease, unsure of how to respond. Ryland looked around, lost for the confidence that had carried him so easily. His pedestal, built over years of unquestioned admiration, had begun to crack. People noticed the cracks. They exchanged glances, realizing perhaps for the first time how much they had ignored, how long they had allowed patterns to go unchallenged. I didn't need to gloat or explain. The truth had already spoken. I didn't reconcile with anyone. I didn't hug Ryland or shake hands with relatives. I didn't need apologies to feel complete. Instead, I released. I released the hurt, the frustration, the years of silence. I carried nothing from the reunion except clarity and a sense of quiet strength. The weight I had carried for so long finally felt lighter. It wasn't about them acknowledging my growth. It was about me embracing it fully, without their validation. Driving away, I felt the tension in my chest ease. The past no longer had a hold over me. I didn't need to return to the patterns that had shaped me as a child. I didn't need to seek their approval or earn their attention. My path was my own. I could look ahead without fear, without expectation, without compromise. For the first time in years, I recognized my own worth clearly. It was not measured by anyone else's standards. It was the result of persistence, of learning to stand alone, of surviving in silence and emerging stronger. I had built something that no one could take from me, a self-respect grounded in my own truth. I smiled quietly to myself, not out of triumph over them, but because I knew I had reached a place they could not touch. My life, my choices, my future, all were mine. I had left the shadows of judgment and comparison behind. Peace settled over me, calm and steady, as I drove into the life I had earned, carrying nothing but my own strength and the knowledge that I was enough.